everyone, and welcome to Transit Equity Day. Thank you for joining us on this 4th annual Transit Equity Day. I'm Sherry Conca, Conservation Program Coordinator for the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and our co-host is Stuart Schwartz, Executive Director for the Coalition for Smarter Growth, which is the leading organization in the DC region advocating for walkable, bikeable, inclusive transit-oriented communities. CSG has been a leading advocate for transit, including supporting bus network redesigns and dedicated bus lanes for more frequent, reliable service, winning the first ever dedicated funding for Metro, serving on the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority Bus Transformation Project, and winning business community support for bus service through the Metro Now Coalition. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that as Virginians, the ground beneath our feet is the ancestral and unceded traditional territory of the Algonquian, Siouan, and Iroquois peoples. In our gratitude to these indigenous communities, let us recognize and reflect on the ongoing legacy of colonialism as we work towards dismantling colonial practices. Thank you. We'd love to hear your questions and comments today, so please enter them in the chat and we will address as many as we can after we hear from our speakers. Stuart will be helping with the questions and answers. If you'd like to share or revisit today's presentation, a recorded version will be available through our webpage, YouTube channel, and Facebook page, as well as through the Coalition for Smarter Growth channels. And I'd like to give a big thanks to our partners who made today's event possible, including the Coalition for Smarter Growth, Community Climate Collaborative in Charlottesville, the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, Hampton Roads Transit, RVA Rapid Transit, CASA Virginia, the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and Virginia Organizing. And I have one quick plug. You can join our legislative updates forum on clean transportation bills that are in the General Assembly right now by tuning in tomorrow at 11 a.m. And we will put the link to the legislative updates forum in the chat box. Now I will turn it over to Karen Camplin, who is a major force across the state for clean, equitable transportation, affordable housing, and smart growth. Karen is Transportation and Smart Growth Co-Chair of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, Environmental and Climate Justice Chair of the Virginia State Conference of the NAACP, President of the Fairfax NAACP, and Co-Director of the Green New Deal Virginia. Karen will take it from here.
Thank you, Sherry. I really appreciate being here today, and I want to thank all the panelists ahead of time for joining us. And thank you to everyone for joining us here today as we celebrate the birthday, the life, and legacy of Rosa Parks, who made history in 1955 when she refused to move to the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Ms. Parks was an iconic figure in the movement for social justice and racial equity, and played a major role in the inception of the civil rights movement that ended legal segregation in the United States. Furthermore, her historic protests served as one of the instrumental catalysts to draw attention to not only the civil rights movement, but directly to the unequal access of Black and Brown and people of color to public transportation. Reliable transit is an essential public service which is on par with utilities such as water and electricity. Access to transit is one of the greatest indicators for one's individual's ability to move up in society, and it also plays an integral key to a municipality's economic vitality. Transit Equity Day is a collaborative effort to promote transit as a civil right and a strategy to combat climate change. This day of action is also intended to raise awareness of the importance of focusing on just transition from a fossil fuel economy to clean, renewable energy. Expanding non-fossil fuel public transportation is a foundation to achieving this transition. It also requires ensuring all workers are able to participate in the clean energy. As you know, or at least many of you, transportation is the largest and fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions here in Virginia. as well as approximately 5% of commuters nationwide use public transportation to get to work, and approximately 69% of Black households and 78% of Latinx households own at least one car. The national average of car ownership is around 80%. The COVID-19 pandemic also clearly showed us the importance of public transportation in our society and how important it is for us to develop protective provisions for transit workers as well. So as we move forward to try and figure out how to develop a more robust and comprehensive transit and transportation system here in the Commonwealth, I implore that we also use an equity lens to make sure that everything that we do is done equitably and fair and transparently. And so we use a very high profile bird's eye view lens approach at making sure that equity is a part of decision-making processes. One of the equity lens that we should use is governance and procedural. Who's at the table when we're putting in input and making decisions for how our transportation system should be developed and designed and implemented as well as operated? Where are the resources being allocated? And we really need to make sure that the transit funds are actually funds both on a federal, local, and state level are not directed solely for single occupancy vehicles. We need to make sure that our transportation funds go towards transit as well as towards complementary amenities such as sidewalk, bike lanes, and bus shelters. And then finally, when we use our equity lens, we must look at the outcome and make sure that not just one group or location benefits, but make sure everyone benefits. And in addition, that everyone has the resources to be resilient and sustainable, and especially during times of emergency and health, not health, but weather crises. But it'll take a lot for us to work together to develop that system here in Virginia and to move away from that, from an auto-centric community and be able to live together in one with a robust and comprehensive transportation system. As I mentioned, it needs to include sustainable approaches that are inclusive and includes inclusive land use practices, affordable and reliable transportation options, affordable housing, safe working conditions for transit workers. We need safe and healthy and livable neighborhoods that are connected by public transportation, sidewalks, bike lanes, and of course, dedicated funding. Another way that we can ensure that we have a robust transportation system is also encourage your elected officials to support legislation that would promote public transportation and of active transportation. Going through the General Assembly session right now, we have some really great bills. One is the Modernization in Transit Study. It's currently on the House floor. And what this one is calling for a statewide study on how we can improve and modernize our transit network. As we transition to a clean energy economy, we know that we're going to have to do a lot of upgrades for transit stops and stations to be able to accommodate electrified fleets, pardon me. And so this modernization in transit study is looking at best practices and the best way to do it in an equitable manner. Another bill that's going through General Assembly session, which is currently over in the Senate, is making amendments to the transit-oriented transit-oriented development bill that was passed last year by removing parking requirements in hopes of making construction for buildings to be cheaper and then, of course, further promoting affordable housing and transit-oriented developments. And then finally, there is an Environmental Justice Act that's going through both the House and the Senate, which is intended to strengthen the EJ Act that was passed last year and requiring that equitable consideration is made throughout all of our environmental and permitting processes. So I'm going to pause here and turn the presentation over to our experts that are going to provide us some more information about what is happening across the Commonwealth. First, we will start off with Kendra Norrell. She is the board president of RPA Rapid Transit. And then we're going to take a brief break for a video testimonial from HRT Transit riders. And then Joe Dillard from the Hampton Roads Transit, he is the Organizational Advancement Officer, will then provide a few words, followed by Caetano de Campos Lopez from the Community Climate Collaborative. And Caetano is the Director of Climate Policy, and he's located in Charlottesville. We'll have another brief break for a video testimony from a Fairfax County Transit rider, and then Hyejeon King from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation department, where she serves as the Senior Transportation Planner, will provide a few words. And then we will open up for a question and answer session, which will be moderated by Stuart Schwartz with the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and he will be assisted with Tim and Sherry from the Sierra Club. So with that, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Kendra. Kendra?
Hi, I'm Kendra Norrell. I'm the board president for RVA Rapid Transit, and we're a nonprofit located in Richmond, Virginia, but really focused on the Richmond region and providing transit access to both all-purpose core riders as well as mode shift riders. And so we really want to increase the conversation. Well, let me say this. We are in the process of currently changing what our focus is in RVA Rapid Transit and looking at bringing in more community engagement and understanding what riders want to see out of the GRTC and how we can use that information to really uplift the ride shift for the GRTC and where we are planning or how we plan to move forward. So next slide, please. As it stands now, this is our vision and mission statement. But once again, so this year for 2021, we've hired a director of community engagement. And so we're really focused at this point on identifying what topics we really want to uplift and how we want to move forward as an organization to make sure that we are meeting the needs of riders that use the GRTC. So we are very much focused on currently on getting that engagement from the direct community engagement from riders as it stands now to really help us identify what our path moving forward will be. And so we have launched a new program. It's called Riders Voice. And so this is a community engagement to get direct feedback from riders on experience and wants from the GRTC. So that will really help us figure out our path forward for 2021 and beyond. Next slide, please. So we have recently signed on to the Transit Center's Transit Just Principles, and this is how we are really trying to break down what our advocacy buckets will be for 2021 and beyond, I guess. And so we're really looking to make sure that while we are focusing on sustainability and economics and that we're also addressing the accessibility of the GRTC and the affordability of the GRTC, and that all of this development is moving forward in an equitable way. And our focus on equity is making sure that we are identifying the paths forward for riders to advocate for themselves, as well as how we can really help uplift a lot of the things that they want to see. Next slide, please. So we are looking at a lot of the general concerns that we have from some riders. We acknowledge that a lot of our changes are going to cost money. So we're really looking to start pushing some action items on riders and people in Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield to really start advocating to increase budgets costs within the localities so that we can have stronger financial support from localities and create the transit system that riders need and that riders deserve in the greater Richmond area. Thank you.
Okay, and Tim, I think we need sound on the video.
Thank you, Kendra. And I just wanted to remind everyone, this is a video testimonial from the Hampton Roads Transit transit rider. Thank you.
All right, let me try that again.
While you're figuring that out, Tim, should we, because Joe was going to follow the video, so maybe as you're trying to figure out the sound, maybe we can flip it and have Joe go first and then the video. Is that okay?
Weather.
Oh, never mind.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline McIntyre, and I'm with Virginia Organizing, and I am a rider of the HRT, Hampton Roads Transit. I find that the bus are running a little bit slower now. Well, about 6 months ago, where buses were a 30-minute, every 30 minutes, now the same bus is every hour. And with people having to go to work, having to go to doctor appointments or whatever they're doing within the midday, if you miss that bus, you literally gonna wait 1 hour. And I think that's kind of unacceptable, because we look at weather conditions or anything that be happening that, you're literally standing out, no shelter for 1 hour. Hi.
All right, looks like the video cut off over right then.
Do you want me just to go?
Yeah, sorry, Joe.
Okay.
So sorry,
And
folks.
Miss, how you guys doing? My name is Joe Dillard. I'm here with Hampton Roads Transit. I think Miss McIntyre was putting it very eloquently of what's going on with transit in the Hampton Roads region. I want to thank the Sierra Club and partners. I know Lisa Guthrie's on from VTA as well, a current partner with HRT, and we wanted to definitely share a few moments with you all to not just address with Ms. McIntyre's and from Virginia Organizing has been saying, but kind of where HRT is today and how we're going to play our part in the equity. I know Karen earlier said something about electrifying the fleet. On September 18th, the governor came and, well, Hampton Roads Transit picked the first public transportation bus on the road. So we're trying to be innovative. We're trying to do our part. We're going to toot our horn here in my presentation, but we're going to try to move through it rather quickly. In the past, Hampton Roads Transit, as well as GRTC and other agencies, the way we perform or the way we talk about it is an a la carte system, meaning that each city gets what service they pay for. So which Ms. McIntyre is talking about, it could be Newport News is paying, and I'm using these as an example, $2 million a year for transit, where Norfolk is paying $20 million and Virginia Beach is paying $7 million. So when you do that, the system isn't truly a regional system. Norfolk couldn't afford transit service from 5 a.m. to midnight, where Virginia Beach, that has twice the population, may stop service at 7 p.m., which causes these conflicts where you have 30-minute services in some regions and 30-minute hour services in other regions. That model of funding has been outdated forever. And I looked in the comment section and people said, refer to what bills you're talking about. Last year, fortunate enough for us, with working with Lisa Guthrie, BTA, the Sierra Club, and other grassroots organizations, we finally got a bill through to talk about dedicated funding for us in the region. And that bill was Senate Bill 1038. But we can go to the next slide. Right now, we use these numbers to show that when we were at the session or when we were talking to legislators, to show that the cost per hour amongst peers and average is less, around 20%. The perfect example I like to use is the Charlotte metropolitan region compared to Hampton Roads 30 years ago was probably lagging behind, but they took the time and they invested into their public transit network to the tune of about $107 per hour. And now you can see that the Charlotte region from a metropolitan standpoint compared to Hampton Roads, and I regretfully say it, has surpassed us. But we use this chart to show that we're being good stewards of the monies that we are getting. Next slide. That's also the breakdown of the regional investment. So the monies that we get, we're spending 20% less than compare agencies. However, the regional investment into transit in the Hampton Roads region was about $67, which is 22% less than the average. Again, if you compare us to Charlotte, it's, I'm sorry, my computer just said too quiet. Am I too quiet, you all? Just a thumbs up, Sherry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
It might be the listeners. Video.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, next slide. I'm trying to get closer. So, okay. So as we're going through, what we did was we started this with the dedicated funding that came out of Senate Bill 1038. 1038. It was called a regional transit system. We had to create a regional transit system. We dubbed it the 757 Express. And with that, we took 13 routes, in which Ms. McIntyre is talking about that consistency of service. We now have a system of a 13 route backbone that provides 15-minute service and added amenities. And not only that, it compares the jobs served. If you, as you can see on the left, we typically could serve 137,000 jobs. That would translate to about, I think, $500 million in employment income. And now that we're going to increase that with this backbone, it's going to increase it 127% to almost 300, or a little bit over 312,000 served, and a greater population touched. When we talk about equity and things of that magnitude, our paratransit service, there are different laws and things that you have to be within a quarter mile of a stop. But with this 15-minute service, we do have, and I hope the maps, if I don't have the maps up here, I'll send them to you. The population that we serve are making it more equitable across the greater Hampton Roads region. Next slide. And moving forward, this is just in the weeds. In that bill, it also said that HRT is in the, well, Hampton Roads region is 17 localities. HRT only serves 6 of those cities. So we have partners. You have Suffolk used to be a part of HRT, Suffolk Transit and Water. Under our TPO, the HRTPO, we go through that system and work strategically where we can see synergy of, if somebody in Williamsburg wants to get to the Virginia Beach oceanfront, we're trying to work with those different agencies across the region to make sure that we have a seamless service. Next slide. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. Next slide. So what we coined ourselves on after getting that dedicated funding was providing better reliability, faster commutes, and new connections. Next slide. That came and birthed this new system in which we call the 757 Express. As of September, we put in our first application under Senate Bill 1038, which that dedicated funding equated to over $30 million. That dedicated funding model has now put us in a different time zone. Our budget used to be $100 million. With that additional $30 million, we are launching the 757 Express. As I said, in September, we put in our first funding application for $13 million. Many of you know to get a bus takes about 18 months. So we're looking to have systems fully operational in 3 phases. The first phase being operational in October of 2022. Right now, the buses that we ordered were diesel buses because of the price difference right now between an electric bus and a diesel bus. We did get 6 electric buses, as I told you guys earlier, but we're very excited about 757 Express. Next slide. That 757 Express, as I said with you guys earlier, will provide a 15-minute bus service. Right now on the peninsula, which is Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, there's no 15-minute service on the peninsula. That's why in phase 1, we're going to the peninsula first and introduce a 15-minute service on that side. And I think there's 5 routes on the south side. So the whole region itself is going to benefit from this bus coming every 15 minutes. Next slide. New technology. If you pick up your phone right now, you can call an Uber, you can call a Lyft. You cannot call or find out about an HRT-driven app of getting somewhere. There are different apps that use some of our Google data sourcing, but hopefully within the next 12 months, because of this new program, we're going to have new technology with real-time information. Next slide. New amenities. Karen, you said something earlier about bus shelters. The new amenities right now, we have over 2,000 bus stops and maybe a little bit over 200 or 300 shelters. With this new program, you all, we're going to have an additional 600 bus stops. When we're talking about revolutionizing and putting some equity into what we're trying to do, the worst thing, I mean, not the best, one of the biggest upsets that our CEO, William Harrell, has is when we drive by a bus stop or we're riding past a bus stop and we see people out there in the elements, as Ms. McIntyre said, and no shelter whatsoever. So that's one of the things that we're going to be pushing for. Next slide. And I think that wraps up mine of the 757 Express. We do have the Transform Transit. William was on yesterday with Jim Spore, the old city manager of Virginia Beach, of Reinvent Hampton Roads, just trying to dial in things that we want to get done. So we look forward to working with all of you guys and executing the 757 Express.
Thank you, Joe. I think we've gotten some really great information on what's going on in the RVA. We heard about Hampton. Now let's go over to Charlottesville, and we're going to hear from Caetano. You're on.
Hi, hello everybody. Happy Transit Equity Day first. It's an honor to be here with so many experts, leaders, and advocates from all around Virginia.
Excuse me, Caetano, your video is not on at the time.
Oh, sorry. Now
There
it
you
is. Thank you so much. And please let me know if my if I cut off, because my internet seems to be a little bit unstable. Thank you. Well, public transit is very important for my work at the Community Climate Collaborative, as it is a solution for long-term greenhouse gas emissions reductions and for creating more equitable communities. Public transit is also very important for me. As I was just discussing earlier today, I'm a Brazilian from a big city called São Paulo. Transit systems, the public transit system in São Paulo is charged with some sort of stigma that you're only going to use the public system if you do not have resources for actually owning a car. So it makes everybody, when they are teenagers, growing up, to have the desire to own a car, right? But when I was 18 years old, I moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I had a totally different experience. In Buenos Aires, the public system, the transit system is designed to serve every type of individuals from every different classes, races, ethnicities, and etc. And it makes you want to be a part of it, sort of. I can tell that my own experience is that I never owned a car for the 12 years that I lived in Buenos Aires, and I not even had the necessity of owning a driver's license. Then I moved to the United States when I was 30 years old, and then that's when I first learned how to drive and learned as well how expensive it is to maintain use a car. The major transit, talking about Charlottesville right now, the major transit agency in Charlottesville and our region is CAT. CAT's services helps increase equity in our community by serving mostly members of historically disadvantaged populations. For instance, although African Americans represent 18% of our residents, 32% of CAT's riders are African Americans, and nearly 60% of CATS drivers are from racial or ethnic minorities. However, CATS ridership has been systematically dropping in recent years, from 2.5 million passenger trips per year in 2015 to 1.8 million in 2018. That's a huge drop of 25% in just a few years. And this marked decline in ridership affects funding, as a great share of CATS resources come from federal and state government funds. And in 2018, a great bill was passed by Virginia's General Assembly that approved, that changed the state funding mechanism so that funding is now allocated based on the transit agency's ridership performances. So if you have a declining ridership, declining very fastly, that's going to be critical for you to get more funding. The good news is that CATS director is well aware of that and wants to increase ridership to place CAT out of this potential quote unquote death spiral. At C3, the Community Climate Collaborative, we were thrilled with CAT's positions of wanting to increase ridership, and with the support of the Energy Foundation that allows us to work in a project to help our local transit agency find the best options to increase ridership in a more sustainable and equitable way. For that reason, we are in the middle of a process of coordinating with local social justice organizations to conduct a major survey and a series of focus groups to surface community needs and identify the best opportunities for net growth. Very topic, a recent report from the UVA Equity Center found that CATS riders often complain from a lack of respect in our transit system, very similar to the testimonial that we just saw a few minutes ago. This is an issue because besides going in the opposite direction of transit equity, this can create a system that only serves dependent riders. And a consequence of it is that it can deteriorate the service quality even further, as unfortunately, transit systems with bigger shares of choice riders usually have higher user satisfaction because they feel obligated to provide better services because people are choosing to ride, not riding out of need. Transit also relates, in our understanding, to affordable housing and affordable living. We know that affordable housing is a crucial topic of conversation in our community, with many households expending more than 30% of their combined household income in housing costs. But transportation costs also can usually add up on average in our community between 10 and 15% of their household income. Therefore, the right way in our understanding to provide families with an affordable living is by considering the combination of housing and transportation affordability. As some already mentioned, we believe that the solutions include joint long-term planning for transportation and housing. Another topic related to equity in transit, we have observed here in light of the Black History Month, car-oriented transportation planning has proven to be some sort of de facto segregation mechanism. Here in Charlottesville and in many places around the United States, we have documents saying that routes, highways, sometimes were designed to keep neighborhoods homogeneous, disconnecting the people and disconnecting races, diversity. And that's why new transportation investments now for us and long-term planning should focus on what is called location efficiency. So planning, housing plus transportation together, and the connectivity of underserved communities. And lastly, I would like to emphasize the need of more funding and grants to transit-related climate justice outreach and advocacy. This has been mostly something that C3, for example, has been funding solely with the help of our individual donors. I thank you so much for joining us today and help us look forward help us make this topic an important topic of conversation, and I look forward to finding ways that we can work together to make transit more equitable in Virginia. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Caetano, and thank you for highlighting those key equity issues that not only impact mobility, but the social mobility and also the inclusivity of our communities here in Virginia. With that, I believe we have another video testimony from a Fairfax County transit rider, and then we will transition over to Hei-Jun King from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation.
Good morning, my name is Sabrina and I am an active member of the community of Springfield of South Virginia. I am Salvadorian and I live in Springfield since 2016. As an immigrant, I had a lot of challenges with the access of the public transportation. The waiting time, it's around 40 to 50 minutes. So I think that's time that I can spend with my family or doing another responsibilities at my home. When it's really rainy or it's really cold, it's really difficult for everybody, I think. And I think this will be really helpful for everyone if you guys can help us with the vehicle or the transportation. And I think it's very important to the economy of the country too. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And Hei-Jun?
Thank you, Karen. My name is Hei-Jun King. I'm working with Fairfax County Department of Transportation. My role here as service planner, working on the bus service planning and also the equity analysis. Today, I'm going to talk about the data-driven approach that we use to achieve transit equity. Next, please. Transit equity is protected under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination against any individuals on the race, color, or national origin for any program that receives federal financial assistance. Next, please. For Title VI, we are required to update our Title VI program to the Federal Transit Administration every 3 years. Our last update was completed in September last year. The Title VI program has several key components. It has a public participation plan that tells us what kind of strategy we can use to increase the involvement by minority, limited English proficiency, and low income. And also the language access plan kind of lists what kind of language assistance we need to provide to people who do not speak English very well. The program also has the service standards that we use to monitor our transit services and the Title VI policy. So each year, Fairfax Connector has about 2 to 3 times of service changes. So the Title VI policy defines what service change or fare change is considered as a major change. So if it is a major change, we are required to do analysis to show whether there is any discriminatory impact on minority or the low-income populations. If there is any impact identified, we will be required to do the mitigation. If it's not a major change, no further action is required. Next, please. So what services we provide out there today? As of this January, we have a total of 95 bus routes operating in Fairfax County with over 300 buses. This makes us the largest bus fleet in Virginia. And all the buses are operated in the 3 bus garages in Herndon, West Oaks, and Huntington. Next, please. So what data source do we use to ensure the transit equity? We use the US Census data. It releases American Community Survey on a yearly basis. We also use a Fairfax Connector onboard survey, which is collected every 5 years asking people about how they use our buses and what's their travel pattern look like. But we also use an intelligent transportation system performance data. Our buses are equipped with sensors and GPS units, which allow us to keep track of when and where people get on, get off the bus, and what the bus speed is, where the bus is located, and whether it's getting there on time or not. So on a yearly basis, we receive millions of data points from our buses. Next, please. We use the US Census data to help us better understand our community. We know Fairfax County is a very diverse community. Out of the total county population, 1.14 million, about 49% is minority. The map on your right hand shows the distribution of minority population in Fairfax County. The darker the color represents a higher concentration of minority population. Next, please. In 2020, and median household income in Fairfax County is about $126,000. The low-income households are defined as households making $50,000 or less. This makes us having like 17% of the total households in Fairfax County as low income, which are the low-income household concentration can be as shown on the map as very small, darker green blocks. It's a little bit hard to see. And that also means it's a good thing. We don't have that high percentage of the low-income households in the county. And the blue area represents a median household income between $50,000 and $126,000. And the rest area, which is shown as green, those are the block groups which have a median household income higher than $126,000. Next, please. So who ride our buses? How do we get information about our riders? The onboard survey in 2019 collected over 3,600 passengers. About 66% of those surveyed riders are minority. And the median household income of the surveyed riders are $45,000, which is lower than the low income threshold. And 19% of our riders speak English less than very well. Next, please. We use our ITS data, which is Intelligent Transportation System data, to monitor the transit services and also evaluate whether the services are being distributed equitably between minority and non-minority routes. So system-wide, we have 54%, excuse me, 54% of the routes are minority and 46% are non-minority routes. The service matrix we use to measure the performance of our routes include vehicle load, which is the level of passenger crowding, vehicle headway, which measures how often the buses travels along a route, on-time performance, and service accessibility is more like a measure of coverage. It's calculating how many people or residents have access to our bus services within like a walkable distance. We also look at assignment, vehicle assignment, and the transit amenities like shelters and bus stop signs, benches, trash cans to see whether they are equitably distributed between minority and non-minority routes. Next, please. Lastly, I want to talk about the transit strategic plan we are currently working on. This is a 10-year plan that will lay out recommendations for the future improvements on our bus services. It's a very important document for us. The vision of the plan is to provide equitable, safe, reliable, clean, and effective public transportation service. Starting about 3 years ago, we divided the whole county into 5 sub-areas For each sub-area, we are looking at ways to restructure our bus network in order to better match the people's travel needs. So each area we have about 2 to 3 rounds of public outreach. And the recommendations coming out of each sub-area will be combined into the transit strategic plan. And then we'll share to the public again for their input. So we had a public meeting in January this year, and talking about the TSP, the vision, the goals, and the priorities. We also have a survey online, and that people can provide feedback. Here is a link, www.fairfaxcounty.gov/connector/TSP. If you can share this link with your family, friends, or neighbors, so that we can get more feedback from you. So the public comment period ends by February 19th. So we really appreciate if you can take the time to do the survey and provide us more feedback in terms of the future priority or the improvement areas we can focus on within the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. I'm Stuart Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. Forgot to mention, I also wear another hat as President of the Partnership for Smarter Growth in Richmond. One of our great partners there is Kendra's team at RVA Rapid Transit. Let me start with a question that will start with Kendra, and it was something that was in the chat and relates to the question we have. You know, who are the transit advocacy groups in each part of our state that we've just heard from? I think I know the answer from Kendra, but why don't you start, and then I'm going to ask Caetano to talk about Charlottesville, both his group and other groups that might be there.
Yeah, so for transit, RVA Rapid Transit is the advocacy group in the city of Richmond, and as well as surrounding counties to really help broaden out our frequent and far-reaching public transportation goals.
A follow-up, Kendra, who are you engaging as your champions in the area? What sectors are those champions coming from?
You mean for our rider, like with our riders?
Champions for transit. It can be riders. It could be, you know, I understand you've got some connections to the faith community as well.
Yes. So we have connections to the faith community, but in that process are still relying mainly on having riders as our advocates and our champions. And so we are building that process out and identifying people who are in other nonprofits similar to yours, as well as people who work within different industries across the city to broaden out our reach to riders, businesses, as well as organizations within the city.
Terrific. Caetano, how about Charlottesville? Beyond your group, who are your advocates and how much are you engaging riders as advocates?
All right, so we do have some clean transportation. It's a little bit generic, this terminology. So not only electric vehicles, but transportations that help diminish pollutants and etc. So assuming that transit is cleaner than cars as well, but they are transit specific advocacy. So without this big picture of micromobility, bikes, active mobility, and etc. transit specific advocacy, I don't see any advocacy group working in this topic right now. I believe that we are going to be placing a lot of emphasis in this topic, and we're trying to create a strong transit advocacy group here in our area. But there are active mobilities, bike related, and etc. and some groups that try to touch all of these topics at the same time, but not focused.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know. I think Southern Environmental Law Center and our partners at Piedmont Environmental Council as well would probably be happy to participate with you in that with their Charlottesville base. Joe, who's helping you all advocate for transit with elected officials?
Definitely. Thanks, Stuart. We used to have a group called the Hampton Roads Public Transportation Alliance. They were a main advocate for the Hampton Roads Transit Agency outside of Hampton Roads Transit. We have this thing or this committee under our main board called TRAC, which is our Transportation Ridership Advisory Committee. So what we do now, Stuart, is we try to reach out to organizations that are already concerned or want to advocate about transit and educate them further. So we use as many people as we can. We have this thing called the Social Justice University here in Hampton Roads, where it's maybe 40 or 50 different organizations, the Sierra Club, et cetera. And we went over the last few years and just keep them updated on what's going on with transit, listen to their concerns and try to best fit, work it from there. But we just kind of reach out to the organizations now in 2020, 2021. We reach out to those organizations that already stood up to have interest in public transit.
Well, thank you. One thing I should do is put a plug in for Virginia Transit Association. Lisa Guthrie's been on this chat and call, and they've got their Faces of Transit. Take a look at what they've done there, and they've been strong advocates. They've also looked at promoting the economic value of transit over the years as well, and of course they're tracking things in the General Assembly. Northern Virginia, Sierra Club, Coalition for Smarter Growth, and others have been transit advocates. Hey, Jung, who are you hearing from in your survey right now? Are you hearing from other organized groups, and are you getting good response, I guess, for your surveys for your transit plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have put out the survey online about early January, and we have received, I think, up to later last month, we received about over 2,000 responses already. And so far, we have reached out to different community groups like the Fairfax County Neighborhood and Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. We also work closely with business associations to help us get the message out and get more people provide input to this process.
Well, thank you. A follow-up is related to riders and riders engagement. There's been a push by a number of groups to have rider voices in official positions, such as on transit boards. Joe, do you all have a rider seat earmarked and set aside on your transit board, or more than one?
Not right now. We use that TRAC committee, our Transit Ridership Advisory Committee. Each person has 2 members from the city. They do a report to our full board. Not to say that we won't, or the governor won't appoint somebody that is a rider, but they do have a voice to the full board that we have. I know there is an appetite to add a rider. We do have a bill in this right now, Stuart, Senate Bill 1126, that would be added state legislators. So I don't think that's something that we'll push back on either.
Well, they're a source of money, so having them at the table certainly can't hurt. That gives me a follow-up question for you, Joe. How would it help if DRPT structured their funding in an incentive way to encourage some of the jurisdictions in your area to provide more local funding, matching local funding, so that you could expand more of that 15-minute service? Is there a thought of for that?
Not yet. We have been talking with Jennifer over at DRPT of how we could best serve when it comes to that portion of what you're speaking of. I know Lisa at VTA typically works with DRPT in a closer relationship with those type of avenues, and we either support or try to get some changing into it. But I think it should be an appetite to get it done.
Terrific. I have a question, about service. And, I think one of the things we've learned from the big consulting firms and the experts in the field, like Jarrett Walker and others, is that at least every 15-minute service is essential, that frequency, it really matters a lot. So it's good to see you all try to do frequency. PSG and RVA Rapid Transit worked on that in the Richmond area, and it immediately resulted in increases in ridership. What are the methods of, I'll go to Hei Jung on this one. What are the methods that we can take to increase frequency? What do you need to increase frequency of service?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we did some outreach within the past 2 years about asking people like what will make them to ride our buses more. And one of the improvement area is the bus frequency. People want high frequency buses, and also they want, for instance, the buses can be operated longer hours of the day and go to the places they need to go. And so those are the, and also the travel time, like the bus can improve the bus speed. So those are the top 4 areas that we hear from people again and again in terms of that will make them ride the buses more. Right now, we are working on the bus restructuring, looking at each sub-area of the county, see how we can better align our bus network with people's travel needs. And as part of the TSP, or the Transit Strategic Plan, we put out the questions in our survey, asking people their preference. Like, do they prefer more frequent buses, or they prefer buses going to their neighborhood? So that kind of like trade-off questions that we want to hear from people. What's their preference? What's the priority we need to focus on? And so that we can better meet their needs.
And one of the fascinating things from some of these bus redesign studies that we've been part of is you could have a slightly longer walk to a more frequent route, and in the process actually save time in getting to a job and get to more jobs within the same amount of time. And that was one of the findings in Richmond. I want to ask Kendra, I mean, what are your thoughts about free fares and their value? And, you know, if you had a choice between free fares or sort of more extended or more frequent service, which would you choose and recommend?
So the free fares versus service conversation is very complicated and something that RVA Rapid Transit and our partners are talking about right now, especially since roughly the beginning of the pandemic, the GRTC has been free for riders. And so we've seen the impact that could have on a lot of the riders for the GRTC, especially since about 79% of our riders have a household income below $49,000 for their annual income. And so that's something that we definitely want to think about in the conversation for zero fares, but we also acknowledge the fact that we need funding also to increase the frequency and routes for the GRTC. And so we really like to, in our conversations, we've not landed on any side of this conversation, but we definitely want to make sure that while we talk about it, we balance the benefits of having free fare as well as the benefits of funding improved frequency and routes for the GRTC, and which one will impact riders more in a more positive way. And so that's definitely one of the conversations that we have opened up through our Riders Voice campaign for people to call in and let us know if they have preference, or if not preference, questions about anything or something that really helps identify which is more impactful for the majority of riders moving forward. But we are not against zero fare, but I don't want to say that we have picked a side on any of this conversation.
I think more money would help on all fronts.
Yes.
Joe, and that going back to you on this question as well. I mean, what percentage of your operating costs are paid for by fares? Are you still doing free fares down there in the midst of the pandemic here? And what's your thinking about free fares for the future?
This is a very tough question. I think Kendra answered it better than I would. Of our budget, I think fares make up almost about 20%. As everyone in this room knows, when it comes to public transit, as a result of COVID, Stuart, and the decline in ridership, CARES Act has provided funding to some of our regions, Richmond and Hampton Roads, to help us accommodate having a free fare. In doing so, some of the things that come up is we had the essential service plan. When we did the essential service plan, if you guys remember that testimonial that came in the Hampton Roads region, a result of the essential service plan was for us to go from 30-minute service to running every hour, not because let's not say demand, but bus operators also experienced those type of, or are experiencing the pandemic as well. So our operator shortage shot up out of the roof. We provided that service for a time period of making it free. I don't want to say we are pro free transit if we can plug the $20 million to it. If somebody can if we can continue CARES Act funding from the federal and state level, we'll make our fare probably will be null and void. However, there are conversations going on right now across the region. If the pandemic does not let up, we're advocating at the federal level to have more CARES funding, where we might have to go back to that essential service plan. But in doing so, when we operate our essential service plan, it is free transit for everyone across all modes.
Okay, terrific. By the way, there's some great points and information being shared in the chat, not just questions. And I'm going to try to get to any of the questions, but keep an eye on the chat too, because we're crowdsourcing knowledge here. Caetano, I'm going to come to you. You talked about the diversity of people who rode buses in Buenos Aires and your experience. I mean, we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of decades in the DC area trying to get more people to ride transit. Some people who might already have cars, and because we're trying to use it as a transportation solution, as a climate solution, and we know that it, compact transit-oriented development works for economic competitiveness. But what the pandemic has shown is that our telecommuters dropped off, those who could telecommute, and essential workers who couldn't telecommute stuck with the system. What does that tell you about how we should plan and fund transit going forward? Should we focus on those who are most need, don't own cars, are a lot of the essential workforce we've talked about, or can we do both? Should we do both to also get those who have other options?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this topic again. I think that as much as we can focus on both, it's better for the long-term benefits of the system, right? As I mentioned before, unfortunately, I believe that a system that over time is only used by these dependent riders might be not appreciated by some politicians or etc. the way it should be if everybody used the systems. So I believe that the unit has power, and as more diverse is the population that uses the system, the more investments the system is going to receive. So I think that keep it diverse over time. If the system becomes to look like some sort of population only, you might end up in the Brazilian situation where there is a stigma, and then that's the worst case scenario even further. I just wanna, the last couple of things, Buenos Aires, one of the things Buenos Aires doesn't have a lot is parking lots. Parking in Buenos Aires is a headache. So parking, somebody mentioned parking, transportation planning for municipalities and parking. Yes, we have, I would say we have a lot of parking, too many parkings, that these lower amount of parkings is necessary for more transit use. The other thing is free fare. I was just talking with Kat, director today, and in the talk of free fare, I think that one of the greatest concerns of transit agencies is that fundings from the state or other levels of government for free fares are available right now, but they do not provide certainty of 10, 20 years of funding. So it's very difficult for a transit agency to make a decision of shifting the system to a free fare system if we do not have ways to feel confident that this is going to be sustainable 5 years from now. So I just want to bring this up.
That last point is great. I mean, dedicated funding for our operations would be really helpful in addition to capital. And there's a lot of effort too to convince the federal government, as they did during the CARES Act, take this precedent of them funding operational costs for transit for the first time, I think, in history, to have them do that as well. Love that you mentioned parking. It's a pet peeve of ours. Too much parking kills cities. There's probably a reason why Buenos Aires is such a beautiful place that people love to visit. And yeah, if you make parking too easy, people will drive and park, those who have that option. And of course, it affects the health and quality of life for everybody else. There is a follow-up question for you here. I'll give you one. Well, no, I think I'll hold that because I want to go to Heijon on this one. And by the way, we're going to 1:15. That includes a short wrap-up by Karen. So please stick with us because I think the information's been terrific. Heijon, you and I were talking at the start of this thing is this sort of is a follow on here. You know, in I-66, there's an agreement, which is, you know, the one positive thing about the hot lanes, I guess, is that we're funding transit from the tolls, as well as from the state-owned I-66 inside the Beltway tolls. However, I've been worried that a lot of that will go to the longer distance commuter who could also telecommute and may not stick with it, and not really generate enough funding for the frequent service that we might need for Seven Corners, Bailey's Crossroads, Route 1, the other areas where you've focused on lower income populations. How is Fairfax Connector going to resolve that and find that right balance?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And also, I think this is a great time for us to get people's input in terms of the preference that the public wants. You're right that as part of the I-66 toll revenue, we are able to fund a couple of express routes or commuter routes going to DC, like 699 and also we recently have the new route is 697 between the Stringfellow Parkway route to DC as well. And so those are routes are very popular. Like before COVID, 699, we get about 600 daily passengers. And sometimes the buses are crowded. And so those routes can bring people, can get people like away from their cars using the transit. That's beneficial to the environment, to the community. But also, as part of the TSP, the plan updating process, we want to hear from the public. What's their focus? What do they prefer? Do they prefer more like a cross-county express route, or they want us to focus more on the local routes, get people to their job daily and from their neighborhood to like to schools, to different community centers. And so we want to hear from people what's their priority so that we can take that into our next 10-year plan process.
Well, thank you. Kendra, switching to the state level, we've got HJ 542, Delegate McQuinn's transit modernization study. What can you tell folks about that?
Oh, I'm not too informed on state level bills.
Oh, I caught you on that one. How about Joe? You following it?
I have to an extent. I know Lisa's probably more dialed in with it. Ron Jordan, our lobbyist, spoke in favor of it. Outside of that, I don't have much details to the bill. I know it's on a full house for it now.
We just got a note from Lisa, our person in Richmond, and HJ 532 passed the House. So on to the Senate. Good news, everybody. And, you know, we got a lot of help and a push on that from Virginia Interfaith Power and Light and Virginia New Majority and other groups. A lot of the focus is, you know, not just on the fancy things like new buses and route redesign, but on the basics, getting the basics right, such as having better bus stops and safe access to bus stops, and having, I think we've got the support of the team at Department of Rail and Public Transit. Jennifer DeBrule's on here. Hopefully it fits in with their existing work plans, but just to get a good assessment of the condition of our transit service and infrastructure around the state. Because, you know, if you truly document the needs, we can then turn around and point it out to the legislature about how much more funding we really need for high quality transit service, both for the existing service and then, of course, talking about further extension. One of the things I like to talk about and note is that we'll spend $100 million on an interchange with a drop of a hat, but $100 million is seen as something beyond belief for many transit agencies. I think the entire Richmond agency is 50 million, 55 million for regional transit service. And that's, you know, nowadays that's one interchange or less than one interchange. Let me see, there was another question earlier that I didn't get back to. Went back to a comment Caetano made, which was, and we'll finish up with this. You mentioned that all this investment in cars has resulted in, you know, barriers to equity and opportunity. What do you see on that? And you're the wrap up, so you have to be pretty quick here.
All right, thank you. what I mentioned is that there is evidence from all over the US on Charlottesville Inclusive that car-oriented transportation planning from the 1940s to 1960s, more or less, have deliberately created either highways through virtually eliminating historically black-brown neighborhoods, or between white and diverse neighborhoods, so that it explicitly said favored neighborhood homogeneity. So you can read it in many ways. One of the ways you can read is that some sort of de facto segregation after the segregation was illegal in our state.
Yeah, tore apart cities and just sped the commuters in and out and enabled white flight in many cases. We're all fighting back on that, tearing down some of those urban freeways. I will give a plug to our national partners, Transportation for America. They're running a campaign to equalize federal funding, which has been 80% highways, 20% transit for years and years and years. And we're going to try to equalize that to 50-50. So they're running a major campaign on that. Let me turn it over to Karen for wrap up. Thank you all to a great panel discussion.
And thank you, Stuart, for moderating us through a very productive and informative question and answer session. So I'll just be really brief. Presented here to you today, you heard a lot of different things in which we can start reframing and reimagining transportation systems. Transportation, we can no longer look at it as just transporting goods, services, and people from one place to another. It is an integral part of our community. It helps to determine the socio and economic advancements of individuals. It can help alleviate social isolations for our elderly population. It creates it increases actually transit opportunities for those who do not have a car, whether because of circumstance or personal preferences. And of course, it does its traditional role of transporting our goods from Amazon and Etsy and all those things to our home. But it can also get us out and about and moving and having community identity as well as belonging and interaction. So I mentioned earlier, we've got some really important legislation that is going through the House and the Senate that still needs support. The modernization bill has passed through the House. Thank you, Lisa, for giving us that great news here. But it's also going through the Senate, so it's still going to need some support there as well as all of those other bills that were listed in the chat. So what we can do, I don't know, Sherry, if we can capture some of those bills and maybe as part of the follow-up email, give everybody those important bills that were listed in the chat. And please reach out to your elected officials and let them know to support it, both your local and state elected officials, and that we need to start thinking about a more active transportation, more inclusive transportation, and readily improve access to our public transportation system here in Virginia, as well as increase in funding and dedicated funding to support these amazing services and programs that are operating within our boundaries. So with that, I would like to thank all of the panelists that were here today. Thank you, Kendra, Kikana, Kendra, Joe, and Heijung, and thank you again, Stuart, for hosting, moderating the question and answer session, and to Sherry and Tim for hosting us here today. So thank you to all of our program sponsors and partners. And with that, I bid everyone adieu and have a great and wonderful rest of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everybody for attending.